The cocoa mug was still warm when Evelyn Hartley vanished from a Portland, Oregon suburb, population 11,032. January 1971 arrived with cold rain and thick fog, blanketing the edge of Forest Park. At 7:38 a.m., Evelyn's neighbor, Mrs. Marjorie Lane, waved through her kitchen window as the 9-year-old girl, wearing a pale yellow coat and clutching her school bag, walked along the wet Maple Street. Evelyn was heading to the elementary school bus stop, as she did every morning, carrying the blue canvas bag that was a birthday gift from her parents. Mrs. Lane watched as the girl's figure faded into the fog, then disappeared among the moss-covered trees by the roadside. What happened in the next 30 minutes would haunt Portland for over half a century. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. In January 1971, Portland was shrouded in thick fog, with light drizzle falling on the low wooden houses scattered along the edge of Forest Park. The morning air was heavy with moisture and silence, broken only by the distant hum of a truck and the rustling of wind through the pine trees. At the end of Maple Street, the small Hartley family home still had its lights on. Inside, Nora Hartley prepared breakfast while her daughter Evelyn, 9, put on her coat and tied her shoelaces. The girl slung her beloved blue canvas bag over her shoulder, said something softly to her mother, and stepped out the door. On the porch, the cold air rushed in, and fog obscured the street. A neighbor, Miss Jenkins, from the house across the street, later said she saw Evelyn walking briskly along the sidewalk, clutching her bag to her chest, heading toward the bus stop. A few hundred meters away, the fog was growing thicker, tiny raindrops clinging to the girl's red coat. A strong gust of wind swept through the neighborhood, making the dry branches scrape against each other with a shrill sound. When Nora glanced out the window, she saw only the wet street and faint tire tracks fading into the fog. No sign of her daughter. At first, she assumed Evelyn had reached the bus stop as usual. But when the school called to say the girl wasn't in class, a chill ran down Nora's spine. Thomas Hartley, the father, left work immediately and returned home. They walked along Maple Street, calling Evelyn's name in vain, passing low patches of forest and small alleys near the house. No one had seen Evelyn since early that morning. The hours that followed dragged on in silence and dense fog. Before the rain could clear, Nora clutched the phone, her voice trembling as she told the operator, "My daughter is missing." On the other end, the sound of a typewriter clacked, and a question came, "Can you describe this morning, ma'am?" Nora nodded, though no one could see, her voice breaking in short breaths. Across town, at the Portland police station, the desk officer wrote the first line of the report, "Missing juvenile, Evelyn Hartley, female, age 9. A formal investigation began. 20 minutes later, police sirens echoed down Maple Street. A white and blue cruiser stopped in front of the Hartley home, its tires grinding on the wet pavement, splashing gray water. Lieutenant Harold Dunn stepped out, wearing a raincoat, his cap pulled low. He had handled many missing persons cases, but a child vanishing in broad daylight, in a quiet neighborhood like this, was unusual. He asked Nora about the last time she saw her daughter, then had Thomas point out the route Evelyn took to the bus stop. The father's voice was hoarse, his eyes fixed on the window. "She went straight this way, like always, never cut through the woods." Dunn jotted notes quickly, then surveyed the area with a young officer. The porch floor still held small shoe prints, mud smeared on the steps. The wooden gate behind the house was ajar, rainwater dripping from its hinges, suggesting it had been opened since morning. Dunn paused for a long moment, his gaze following the pine trees behind the garden, where the fog remained thick. He signaled the officer to take photos, then told Nora, "We'll start a search team tonight. Please gather some of the girl's items, clothes, a toothbrush, anything with her scent." By late afternoon, the quiet Maple Street saw unfamiliar faces. 2 patrol cars parked at either end of the road, officers talking over radios, flashlights sweeping across the forest edge. A clerk recorded neighbors' statements, who left their house when any strange vehicle noises, any sightings of the girl's red coat. Mrs. Jenkins from across the street insisted. I saw her walk by holding that blue bag, but a few minutes later, the fog was so thick I couldn't see anything. Another neighbor vaguely recalled hearing a truck engine revving near the forest about half an hour later. No one was certain of anything, but those scattered details were enough for Dunn to suspect adult involvement. At dusk, the air turned colder. The search team brought in 2 tracking dogs. Dunn led them along the fence behind the house, letting them sniff Evelyn's coat. The dogs whined softly, then pulled their handlers down a leaf-strewn trail. The damp smell of earth and pine needles hung in the air, every breath thick. The trail led to a clearing near the forest edge, where the ground was slightly disturbed with a long skid mark. One dog stopped, barked softly, then lost the scent. Dunn crouched, shining his flashlight, spotting faint tire tracks in the wet mud, small, possibly from a car. He called the forensics team to document the scene before the night rain arrived. Back at the house, the living room's light cast a pale yellow glow. Nora sat motionless in a chair, her hands clasped tightly. Thomas stood by the door, staring into the dark street. Dunn spoke softly, trying to keep his voice steady. We'll keep going through the night and expand the search into the forest. Stay inside. We'll update you as soon as we have anything. He knew those words offered little comfort, but they were the only promise he could make. By midnight, the fog was impenetrable, and the search team's flashlights cast patchy beams on wet tree trunks. Radio chatter mixed with the sound of rain. No new traces. Scent trails stopped at the forest edge. Dunn responded curtly. Log the coordinates. Resume at dawn. He stood in the dark a moment longer, listening to the wind through the branches, and picturing a 9-year-old girl walking alone in Portland's thick fog. Back in his car, he wrote the final note in his book. Trail ended near forest boundary. Possible human interference. Then he closed it, started the engine, and drove down the slick street, headlights sweeping past the Hartley porch, where the mother still sat, clutching the phone, waiting for news she dared not name. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained leaden gray. A thin layer of fog drifted low along the trees, and the crackle of radios mingled with the cold air. Lieutenant Harold Dunn and the search team returned to the forest behind Maple Street, where the tracking dogs had lost the scent the previous night. The ground was muddy, old footprints mixing with new ones. Dunn had the area marked off and split the team to search downwind. They moved slowly, maintaining absolute silence. Each step sank deep into the sodden leaf litter. Near mid-morning, a young officer named Whitaker called out softly, "Lieutenant, you should see this." About 20 meters off the trail, among low weeds, something blue and mud-streaked lay. As Dunn approached, he recognized it as a school bag, its strap torn, one corner ripped open, caked with dirt and decayed leaves. He signaled everyone to step back, marked the scene with stakes, and called for the forensics team. When the techs arrived, they cordoned off the area with tape and photographed it from multiple angles. The bag was carefully lifted with gloved hands, its surface heavy with damp and reeking of mold. Dunn opened it with a metal clip inside. Soaked notebook pages clung together. Evelyn H. scrawled handwriting, faintly visible. A small brown-covered notebook, a music journal, lay in the middle, filled with simple notations, the last line stopping at an unfinished note. At the bottom was a broken pencil, its wooden tip splintered, and a piece of red ribbon. Dunn lingered, his eyes fixed on the notebook. He ordered close-up photos, sealed everything, and noted, "Backpack recovered, content intact, signs of tear water exposure." The surrounding area was searched further. A few meters from the bag, a forensic tech found a small shoe print in the mud, its sole bearing a star pattern common to children's shoes. The prints led toward the forest edge, then stopped abruptly. Nearby was a faint tire track, only its outer edge clearly visible. Whitaker measured it, suggesting it could be from a small car with modest tire size. The marks were partially obscured by fresh soil, washed down from a slope, making the outlines incomplete. A tech leaned close to the ground, using a straw to collect a mud sample into a vial. He whispered, "Still warm, probably made before the second rain." Dunn stepped back, taking in the scene. From this spot, the Hartley house's roof was faintly visible through the pines, just over 300 meters away, close enough to hear a shout. He sighed, feeling both frustration and unease. The team worked diligently, photographing, marking, logging coordinates. The surroundings seemed frozen. The scratch of a pen on a clipboard and a radio weather report broke the silence. Rain expected again after noon. Dunn checked his watch. Only a few hours remained before more rain would hit, and they needed to finish collecting samples before the mud dissolved. The forensics team followed protocol. Each item was photographed individually, distances measured, and a site map drawn. A female tech carefully plucked a single strand of hair from the bag's strap with tweezers stuck to the stitching. She showed it to Dunn through a magnifying glass. He nodded slightly and had it sealed in a labeled vial. Trace evidence. Hair. Nearby, Whitaker set a ruler beside the tire track as the mud began drying under weak sunlight. He planted a small sign, "Tire track, A1." When the work was done, Dunn had all evidence sealed in a metal box on site. He read out each item's code for the clerk to record. Item 1, school backpack, blue canvas. Item 2, notebooks, 1 music journal, 1 composition book. Item 3, red ribbon, partial. Item 4, pencil, broken. Item 5, shoe prints, juvenile size. Item 6, tire track, A1. Item 7, single hair strand. His voice was steady, unwavering. When finished, he closed his notebook and stood silently, scanning the area. Tall trees dripped water. Fog hovered near the ground. The only sounds were the rhythmic click of a camera and wind threading through the leaves. By noon, the rain returned. Heavy drops pounded the ground, quickly turning the mud into a sludgy mess, washing away any remaining traces. Dunn signaled the team to pack up, covering the area with plastic tarps. As they withdrew, he glanced back, seeing the blue of the school bag blur into a smear against the brown earth. When they left the forest, only the wooden stakes marking the scene swayed in the wind, and the tire tracks from the patrol cars were already fading under the water. In his end-of-day report, Dunn wrote briefly, "Evidence recovered, possible abduction scene. Rain degraded area integrity." All that remained now lived in rain-soaked reports, where the faintest traces might be the last fragile thread to the missing girl's path in that grim Portland fog. That afternoon, as the forensics team left the scene, a new tip came from the neighborhood near the forest. A man named Raymond Carter, living 3 houses from the Hartleys, called to report seeing a dark green Chevrolet parked near the forest trail where the school bag was found. On the morning of the disappearance, Carter was certain because the car was unfamiliar. Its license plate smudged, and vehicles rarely passed through early in the morning. He said the driver was a brown-haired man in a cap, smoking constantly. When Dunn asked why he only reported it now, Carter paused, then said, "I didn't think it mattered until I saw the police cars today." The investigation team checked Chevrolet owners in the area. A quick match came up. Oregon Plate 2 A1549. Registered to Arthur Keene, 31. Living just 4 blocks from the Hartleys. Records showed Keene was a private music teacher, formerly at the local high school, now giving piano lessons to local children. When his name surfaced, Nora Hartley recognized it immediately. "He taught my daughter twice a week," she said. "He stopped over a year ago when Evelyn switched schools." Her words silenced Dunn. A man who had direct contact with the victim, seen near the scene that morning, couldn't be a coincidence. That afternoon, Dunn and 2 officers visited Keene's house on Alder Street. The small brick house had gray-painted doors and an overgrown front yard. When Dunn knocked, a tall, thin man with disheveled hair and a sallow face appeared, looking tired. He stayed calm, asking softly, "What's this about, officers?" Dunn showed his badge, explaining they had questions about the disappearance. Keene invited them into the living room, which smelled of pine resin and dusty sheet music. An old upright piano stood in the corner, stacked with neatly arranged scores. When Dunn asked if he knew Evelyn Hartley, Keene replied instantly, "Yes, a former student. I taught her piano for a short time. What happened to her?" Dunn watched his eyes, calm but avoiding direct contact. They went into details. Dunn asked where Keene was the previous morning. The man said, "At home. I woke up late, maybe around 10. When asked if anyone could confirm, Keene shook his head, saying he lived alone. When questioned about the green Chevrolet, Keene admitted owning it but claimed it wouldn't start that morning. Dunn noted this, as it contradicted Carter's report of hearing an engine rev. When Dunn mentioned the car being seen near the forest trail, Keene frowned, saying slowly, "I never drove there. That road's all mud, I know it." The precise answer caught Dunn's attention. He pressed, "How do you know it's muddy if you've never been there?" Keene gave a faint smile. "Everyone around here knows, Lieutenant." After the initial interview, Dunn obtained a warrant to search the car. In Keene's garage, the green Chevrolet was still wet underneath, with dried mud caked around the tire edges. A tech took samples to compare with the scene's soil. No blood or signs of impact were found, but Dunn noticed a long scratch along the rear door, as if scraped by something hard. When asked, Keene said, "Maybe from hitting the gate while backing out last week." The answer was brief, his eyes evasive. Dunn couldn't detain him without solid evidence, only having disjointed clues, conflicting testimony, mud, and the car's location. The next day, Dunn returned for a follow-up. He asked about Keene's relationship with the Hartleys. The man called them very kind, saying Evelyn was a smart kid but easily distracted. When asked why the lesson stopped, Keene said, "The family decided to pause. No reason given." Nora Hartley later confirmed she initiated the stop because Evelyn seemed uncomfortable. The comment caught Dunn's attention, but she didn't elaborate. Soil test results came back that evening. The garage and scene samples had similar compositions, both high in minerals from the forest behind Maple Street. But the similarity wasn't enough for a legal conclusion, as the region's soil was nearly uniform. Dunn knew, once again, he had only suspicions, not proof. Still, he listed Arthur Keene as a primary person of interest, labeled primary interest. Before leaving the office that evening, Dunn looked out the window, seeing rain begin to fall again, drops pattering on the metal roof of the parking lot. He recalled Keene's eyes, not fearful, but guarded, like someone practiced at answering every question. In his report to superiors, Dunn wrote, "Subject Arthur Keene. Occupation, private music instructor. Link to victim confirmed. Statements inconsistent. Alibi unverified. Evidence insufficient for detention." He paused, then added a smaller slanted note, "Keep under observation." Outside, the night rain spread evenly, dimming the streetlights, while the house at 74 Alder, where Keene lived alone, remained lit late, a yellow glow seeping through the curtains, unmoving. 3 days after questioning Arthur Keene, relentless rain cloaked Portland in heavy gray. Lieutenant Harold Dunn, after an urgent meeting with the chief, decided to expand the search beyond the Maple Street neighborhood. The forest clues were no longer fresh, but he believed the girl might have been taken farther away that morning. A large map was spread on the briefing table, red dots marking possible routes, from Maple Street along the forest edge to Highway 30, then down to the Willamette River, over 2 miles away. Dunn pointed to a bend with an old iron bridge. If the perpetrator went this way, this is the quickest spot to dispose of evidence. The next morning, a large-scale search began. Over 40 city rescue workers and Portland police split into 3 groups. One combed the forest path to the riverbank. Another deployed motorboats and divers to scan the water around the St. John's Bridge. The third coordinated a helicopter to survey from above. Engine roars echoed through the fog, reflecting off the river's murky early winter surface. Dunn stood on the north bank, watching divers descend, each with a flashlight and signal line. He knew the odds of finding a body after nearly a week were slim, but every possibility had to be ruled out. Meanwhile, another team searched the nearby drainage system and industrial dump. Technicians in thick gloves examined every sack and scrap bin. The air was thick with the stench of chemicals, mold, and old rain. They found nothing but a few unidentifiable fabric scraps. To the west, along the riverbank, police noted old tire tracks washed over by water, too faded to date. Dunn ordered them photographed and measured, then moved on. By midday, the police helicopter reported a floating object near the bridge, possibly a large fabric bag. 2 boats retrieved it, pulling it ashore. When opened, it was just a sack of dry branches and debris, unrelated to the case. A heavy silence fell. On the bank, Dunn hunched over a rain-soaked map, crossing off searched areas, his voice hoarse as he told his team, "We keep going until evening." He knew his crew was exhausted, but no one dared suggest stopping. At the police station, phones rang constantly. Dozens of residents reported seeing a girl in a red coat at a park, supermarket, or riverbank. Each tip was logged, but follow-ups led nowhere. Rumors spread faster than facts. The Oregonian ran a front-page story, "The Maple Street Mystery, Missing Girl Still Unfound." A black-and-white photo of Evelyn was printed large, round face, hair tied high, bright eyes. Below was a police quote, "Abduction not ruled out." Overnight, her name became known across Portland. Nora Hartley refused to speak to reporters. She rarely left the house, keeping windows shut, only stepping onto the porch when police cars passed. Thomas, the father, joined volunteer search groups, combing the suburbs with locals. Each evening, they returned in silence, boots caked with mud. Dunn gave brief updates, saying only, "We're still working." No one voiced their deepest fear. 4 days later, the search extended 3 more miles along the river. They found floating items, an old shoe, a handkerchief, fabric scraps. All were tested, but none belonged to the girl. In the southern forest, a team found a small ash pile, thought to be recent, but tests showed it was just charcoal from an old fishing camp. Dunn felt pressure mounting from the media and superiors. At Thursday's evening briefing, the investigation chief said bluntly, "We can't just rely on hope. If this is an abduction, we're past the safe window." That night, Dunn returned to the Maple Street forest, with 2 officers. The sky was foggy and cold, their breath forming clouds. He walked slowly along the dirt path to the forest edge, where the blue bag was found days earlier. The mud had hardened, leaving only faint tire tracks. He swept his flashlight, its beam catching wet branches and dripping leaves. Nothing new, just the patter of rain from high branches. Dunn added a note to his book. Search expanded. No body, no sign. Likely removal from area. The next morning, local radio broadcasts began with a steady voice. The disappearance of Evelyn Hartley enters its 7th day. Police have found no traces beyond the backpack and shoe prints near the forest. The public calls it the Maple Street Mystery. The words stung Dunn, sitting in his car at the lot, a lump in his throat. He disliked how the media turned loss into a headline, but he knew public pressure sometimes kept the police from stopping. That afternoon, as the search team wrapped up along the Willamette, rain fell again. Dunn stood on the bank, watching small boats drag nets for a final check. Nothing. No body, no new evidence, no traces. Everything back to zero. He walked slowly to his car, closed the door, and let the rain pound the metal roof. In the dimming light, Portland seemed submerged in one color, the gray of the sky, the water, and a case slipping from his grasp. The Monday briefing took place in the investigation unit's small room. A map of the Maple area covered the wall, red dots marking searched spots. Lieutenant Harold Dunn stood before it, logging the latest forensic results. The initial findings brought no progress, only contradictions. The tire tracks near the backpack site had a diagonal herringbone pattern, while the tires on Keene's Chevrolet were square-grooved from a different year and size. A few millimeters difference was enough to conclude no match. Maintenance records showed no recent tire changes for Keene. Dunn read the note, then marked it in red, no direct link established. He knew this didn't clear suspicion but couldn't strengthen any charges either. Forensics reported on the hair from the backpack strap. Compared to samples from Nora, Thomas, and Evelyn's bedroom, it was no match. The hair was long, thin, and lighter than the mother's. Mold had damaged the root, preventing gender DNA analysis. The report stated, "Cannot rule out third-party origin, insufficient for conclusion." Dunn held the sample vial, light glinting off the nearly transparent strand. He told the tech quietly, "Keep it. We might need it someday." Meanwhile, witness statements tangled like knots. Mrs. Jenkins said she saw Evelyn pass before the church bell, around 7, but the mail carrier insisted he delivered a package near 8:30 and saw a red-coated figure at the street's end. The bus driver swore no one was at the stop when he passed, while a young couple claimed they saw a girl alone on a shortcut to the boulevard just after 8. No one was certain it was Evelyn. Dunn sketched a timeline on a whiteboard, pinning statements to hours, then stepped back. The wide gaps between markers showed the moment of her disappearance remained a blind spot. Another team rechecked Keene's movements that morning. Officers visited his regular auto shop, asking about recent tire changes or repairs. The owner flipped through records, answering curtly, "Nothing, just an oil change months ago." No one recalled Keene bringing his car in that week. When police rechecked his garage, the mud under the car had dried, and samples showed similar soil traits, but not distinct enough to pinpoint. Each conclusion carried the weary tone of a directionless investigation. Dunn revisited Maple Street early, at the time of the disappearance. He walked from the Hartley porch to the sidewalk, the cold, foggy air blurring everything. He counted steps to the corner under a minute. Thicker fog could hide anyone from view. At the dirt path to the forest, the mud had crusted tire tracks overlapping, faded by rain. He shone his flashlight, seeing only smeared ruts, no clear shapes. The silence was so deep he heard his pencil shift in his pocket. Dunn knew one more night of rain would erase it all, as if it never existed. Back at the office, Dunn's desk was piled with reports of tips. People claimed to have seen a girl in a red coat at a park, a mall, the South Side bus station, all checked out as false. Some reported hearing a scream that morning, but cross-referencing showed it coincided with a truck braking on the boulevard. Another mentioned a dark-colored car speeding near the forest, but couldn't recall the license plate or time. These fragmented details only further frayed the investigation's threads. That evening, Dunn sat alone in his office, reviewing files on child disappearances from the past decade. Some began with a foggy morning, no clear witnesses, and ended in silence. The line between persistence and futility felt increasingly thin. On the wall, a small photo of Evelyn, clipped from the newspaper, remained pinned under the Maple Street mystery. Her young face stared down like an unanswerable question. At 11 p.m., Dunn closed the file. The summary report read, "Tire tracks don't match Keene's vehicle. Hair doesn't match family DNA. Witness statements inconsistent. No new evidence surfaced." He signed it, set the pen down, and sat still as rain fell outside the glass. Water streaked the window, blurring the words he'd just written. In that moment, Dunn felt the case slipping away, not for lack of effort, but because each new clue contradicted itself, pushing them further from the truth. He turned off the light, leaving only the red blink of the radio in the dark, its steady pulse like the faint breath of a case fading out. That summer passed in citywide exhaustion. The rain lessened. The pines along Maple Street dried, but the search for Evelyn Hartley saw no progress. Each morning, Lieutenant Harold Dunn arrived at the office, reopened the same old files, and reread forensic reports he nearly knew by heart. Every lead hit a dead end. Unclear traces, conflicting testimonies, a main suspect with insufficient evidence for arrest. The longer it went, the slimmer the chance of truth. By late August, when orders came from above, Dunn knew what was coming. The administrative phrase on the thin document read, "Insufficient evidence for further pursuit." The case was officially suspended. The internal briefing was brief, lasting 10 minutes. The chief spoke evenly. "We've exhausted all resources, air, water, witness investigations. There's no legal basis to continue." Dunn sat silently, gripping his pen until his fingertips whitened. He understood this wasn't giving up, but an admission they'd reached their limit. As the meeting ended, he was the last to leave, carrying the thick file, its cover worn and yellowed from dampness. That afternoon, Dunn took the documents to the Portland Police Department's archive. The basement room had no windows, reeking of old paper and rusty metal dust. Iron shelves stretched to the ceiling, packed with labeled boxes by year and case number. The archivist asked curtly, "Case code?" Dunn replied, voice low, "Case number 71047. Hartley." He taped a new label to the box's edge, signed it, and placed it in the 1971 row. The metal clanged faintly as the box hit the shelf, echoing in the cold basement like a final period. On the box's corner, a red stamp was pressed, its slanted text faint but clear, "Closed, pending evidence." On paper, the case was closed, but in reality, it lingered in many minds. Patrol units still got occasional calls reporting a girl like Evelyn spotted around Portland. Each time, Dunn followed up, checked, and returned with the same result. Nothing new. He made a habit of driving by Maple Street after shifts, eyeing the quiet wooden houses, now changed after months. The Hartleys had moved away in early fall, leaving no forwarding address. Neighbors said they went east to forget everything. The house at the street's end stayed locked, a for sale sign tilting in the wind. Grass overtaking the path. In the press, Evelyn's name appeared less often. It started on front pages, then slipped to small columns. By October, the final article was just 3 lines. "The search for missing girl Evelyn Hartley remains fruitless. Police have paused the investigation due to lack of new evidence." After that, no one mentioned her. The story was swept away by other news, accidents, thefts, and the coming winter rains. In his office, Dunn tucked Evelyn's photo into a drawer. He wasn't used to leaving a case unsolved. Each glance at the fine print, case hash 71047, Hartley, brought a heavy ache in his chest, as if the city had gained an unfillable void. That evening, Portland saw rain again. Water ran along the sidewalks, washing away dirt and the last traces of the longest search he'd ever led. In the police basement, the brown case box sat still on its shelf among hundreds, untouched. The dim light reflected off the red seal, its cold text clear. Case hash 71047. Hartley, Evelyn. Closed. By 2022, Portland had transformed. The city, once cloaked in fog and rain, now glowed with electric lights and traffic noise. Roads once remote suburbs were now bustling neighborhoods, and 1970s cases lay forgotten in decaying boxes deep in the police basement. During the digital archiving project, a years-long effort to digitize old evidence, technician Elena Wu was assigned the 1970-1975 archive. Meticulous and quiet, she'd worked in forensics for over a decade, accustomed to handling evidence most wanted to forget. On an April morning, cold fluorescent lights lit the high iron shelves. Wearing nitrile gloves, Elena carefully pulled down boxes. On a faded label, shaky handwriting read, 1971. Case hash 71047. Hartley, Evelyn. She paused. The name stirred a vague memory from an internal training on unsolved disappearances. Opening the box, old paper dust rose, smelling of mold and rusted staples. Inside were carbon-typed reports, yellowed black and white scene photos, and sealed red wax envelopes all numbered per 1971 system, no barcodes, no digital copies. Elena cataloged each item, entering data into a tablet: scene report, Maple Forest, witness report, Jenkins, technical file, tire tracks, evidence. At the final envelope, she noticed something odd. The old seal was intact, unmarked by an open stamp. The faded red ink read, "Evidence, hair sample, from backpack strap." Elena frowned. Per old protocols, all biological evidence should have been tested, even just for blood type. But in the digitized file she'd scanned, no hair analysis was logged. She opened the original report, finding Dunn's note: hair strand recovered, analysis pending. Below it, a blank, no completion date, no signature. Her heart beat faster. Carefully cutting the wax, she opened the envelope. Inside was a small glass tube wrapped in wax paper, labeled Trace #5. Under the light, the hair was nearly transparent, about 3 centimeters long, its root broken. She examined it under a magnifier. The sample was intact, not decayed. That was rare. Most old biological evidence rotted after decades. She photographed it, logged the code, and called the duty supervisor. "I found unprocessed evidence in the Hartley file," she said. The line went quiet. Then Hartley, 1971. "You sure?" "Sure. Seal intact, never opened." Per project protocol, any preserved evidence had to be recoded and sent to Oregon State Forensics Lab for DNA feasibility. Elena completed the transfer form, affixed a new QR code to the envelope, and placed the sample in a portable cooler. On the dispatch slip, she wrote, "Unprocessed hair sample, potential biological evidence." Before sealing the box, she glanced at the label's number, case #71047. Hartley, Evelyn. The old text sent a chill through her. That afternoon, as the lab's transport van left the police lot, a light rain fell over Portland. Elena stood under the awning, peering through misty glass. She didn't know if that tiny sample could reveal anything after half a century, but in her work, every preserved detail mattered. She returned to her desk, continuing with other boxes, but her mind lingered on that old brown envelope. In the digital catalog, she added a note by the case code: pending DNA extraction. New technology applicable. 3 days later, an internal report from the Oregon State Forensic Laboratory confirmed receipt with a brief line. Under condition, bold text read, "Sample viable. Hair root trace intact." Elena reread it, feeling an echo from decades past, as if a case buried under time's dust was being gently stirred. In the archive room, white light reflected off metal shelves, where old boxes sat still, except for one, its spot empty, leaving a small gap like a breath taken from the past. That evening, as Elena left the office, she walked down a long hallway lined with framed photos commemorating cases solved through DNA technology. Among them, a small motto from the forensics unit was etched on cold steel: "Evidence never dies, only waits to be heard." She paused for a long moment, then nodded faintly, as if answering herself. Somewhere, in a state lab, that tiny hair was embarking on a journey unimaginable to the technology of 1971. The next morning, a notification appeared in the Portland Police Department's internal inbox: preliminary DNA results. Case #71047. Confidential. For authorized personnel only. Elena opened the email, read the first line, and in that moment, the room around her seemed to freeze. The report from the Oregon State Forensic Laboratory, received on the morning of June 12, 2022, was just one page, but enough to halt the entire archive unit. The first line, in bold, partial nuclear DNA profile obtained. Match found, Oregon State Criminal Database. Below it was a name, Arthur L. Keene, born 1940, Portland resident, deceased 2003. Match probability, 99.98%. A note added, profile entered from 2003 felony arrest record. Elena Wu reread it, barely believing her eyes. A hair over 50 years old, collected from a missing girl's backpack in 1971, now matched a criminal DNA profile from the prime suspect. a case closed in the last century. She immediately forwarded the report to management, and within an hour, the news reached the Portland Police Bureau's command office. An urgent meeting was called that afternoon. The old files were brought up from the basement, the worn brown folder labeled Case #71047, Hartley, Evelyn. At the head of the table, Lieutenant Claire Jennings, head of the Cold Case Division, held a copy of the DNA results. A different generation from Dunn, born after the case had faded into silence, she knew the name Hartley as one of Portland's unsolved legends every investigator had heard. Jennings reviewed the report, then looked at the tech team. "We have a 99.98% confirmation.
That's not random.
I want the Hartley case fully reopened immediately." The order was brief and firm. Within an hour, the case sealed in 1972 was back in the system, with a new entry. Reopened. June 2022. Over the next few days, Jennings spent all her time in the records room. She opened every old report, black and white photos of the school bag, sketches of the Maple Forest scene, and Arthur Keene's interrogation notes, handwritten by Lieutenant Dunn. His final line remained, ink blurred by dampness, "Keep under observation." Jennings gave a sad smile, as if a message from the past had arrived just in time. She called the Oregon Bureau of Criminal Identification, requesting Keene's full criminal record. The file was thicker than expected. In 1968, a warning for inappropriate conduct with a female student. In 1970, investigated but not charged for lack of evidence. In 2003, arrested for theft when his DNA was entered into the state criminal database. Jennings read the last line, "Status deceased, July 2003. Though the man had been dead nearly 2 decades, she felt unease, as if he were watching her through the old pages. She convened the investigative team. On a large screen, Keene's 1971 photo appeared, a tall man, dark hair, eyes narrowed behind metal-framed glasses. Next to it was the scanned DNA match. Jennings pointed to the text, "Match ID 2A70-1047. Then she said, "In 1971, DNA technology didn't exist. Now, with one hair, we can reconnect the entire case." Her voice was quiet, but the room was silent. An officer asked, "If Keene's dead, can the case still be prosecuted?" Jennings replied, "No, but we still have a duty to find the truth. A missing child is never a closed matter just because the suspect is gone." She ordered a review of all Keene's old addresses, including the Alder Street house, briefly checked in 1971, and any properties he owned afterward. The next day, Jennings visited the lab to see the sample. The small glass tube sat on a metal table beside a printed DNA analysis chart. The forensic biologist explained, "We extracted partial nuclear DNA, enough to confirm the match with Keene's profile. The hair root was nearly intact, remarkably well preserved." Jennings nodded, eyes fixed on the hair lying quietly in the tube, the only remaining evidence from a case dormant for 51 years. That afternoon, she submitted a report to restart the investigation. At the top, she wrote, "Portland Police Bureau, Cold Case Unit. Case #71047, reopened under directive of DNA evidence connecting subject Arthur L. Keene to evidence recovered from victims' belongings." Below her signature, a new timeline opened, a half-century continuation between 2 generations of investigators. As night fell, she left the building, Portland's light rain falling on brightly lit streets. A thought echoed in her mind, a case could lie dormant for years, but evidence never stayed silent forever. Somewhere in those old files, Lieutenant Dunn must have believed the same. Now, thanks to technology he never knew, Evelyn Hartley's disappearance was finally speaking, softly but clearly, like a voice from the past, demanding to be heard again. Lieutenant Claire Jennings spent the next 2 weeks tracing Arthur L. Keene's past. She wanted to understand the man before he became a name in a criminal database. Each day she visited the Portland archives, where old city and school records were stored. On the 3rd floor, the education department's room was thick with dust, smelling of damp paper and old covers. An elderly clerk wheeled out a cart of files, muttering, "Back then, everything was still handwritten." Among a stack nearly a handspan thick, she found what she needed. Arthur Leonard Keene, born 1940, music teacher, Jefferson High School, Portland. Keene's teaching record was brief. Bachelor's in music from Oregon State University, started teaching in 1965, left in 1969. The reason for resignation column had one typed line, "Resigned, conduct concerns under review." Attached was a complaint from November 1969 by a student's parent describing inappropriate behavior during private tutoring. The complaint lacked details, as the matter was resolved internally without police involvement. The next page, a disciplinary meeting record, showed Keene denying the allegations, citing parental misunderstanding. The outcome: recommended voluntary resignation to protect school reputation. 3 months later, Keene left Jefferson High. No school hired him as a teacher again. Jennings printed the documents, clipping them into the reopened case file. From the education department, she drove to Keene's old neighborhood on Alder Street, just blocks from Maple. The house at number 74 still stood, now with new owners. Repainted walls, a new roof. But the same structure. Jennings stood by the fence, noting quickly, single story with a small basement, typical 1950s design. Property records showed Keene bought it in 1968 and lived there until his death. No wife, no children, no close relatives. His reclusive lifestyle left neighbors with little beyond vague impressions. Jennings met Louise Granger, now 82, Keene's former next-door neighbor. She welcomed her into a small wooden house, her memory sharp. When Keene's name came up, Granger paused, then said, "He was odd, polite, but never looked you in the eye. He only left the house at night. I often saw the basement light on all night. Once I asked, he said he was fixing a piano." Jennings asked about strange noises. Granger nodded. "Often, drilling, hammering, especially after that girl went missing. But back then, people were scared to mention it, afraid of sounding paranoid." Jennings jotted down, "Work in basement at night, post-disappearance." At the police department, she requested Keene's old utility records. In the first 2 months of 1971, electricity usage spiked unusually, double the average. A note on the bill copy read, "Heater in basement reported malfunctioning." No one followed up, as maintenance was private then. To Jennings, those numbers weren't just data. They were like a house's pulse hiding a secret. She returned to Dunn's 1971 interrogation notes. During questioning about the disappearance morning, Keene said he was at home, sleeping until nearly 10. Dunn had added a handwritten note. Subject appears calm. Dirt traces found under nails. At the time it wasn't enough to charge him, but to Jennings, it was a starting point. The dirt under his nails, matching the mineral-rich soil from the maple forest, came from that specific area. She circled the note in red, writing beside it, "Source of dirt?" Jennings also reviewed Keene's civilian records post-teaching. From 1970 to 2003, no steady job. A few scattered private music contracts, then nothing. A 1984 property declaration showed he sold an antique piano for a suspiciously low $50. The buyer, per records, was a now-closed Portland second-hand shop. That Keene maintained the house for over 3 decades without stable income puzzled Jennings. Something else kept him there, even as others moved away. She returned to the 1971 area map. Maple and Alder were less than half a mile apart, linked by a narrow shortcut through a vacant lot, the spot where witness Carter saw the Chevrolet parked that morning. Overlaying a modern map, Jennings realized the lot was now a supermarket parking lot, but in 1971, it was a wild patch of brush, just yards from Keene's backyard. If Keene was involved, he didn't need to take anyone far. He could have pulled the victim into his house through the back door, down to the basement, where no one would see. Jennings stood silently before an old 1971 photo of the house from Dunn's file. The black and white image, taken at an angle, showed light slanting through the basement window, casting a shadow that darkened part of the wall. She stared for a long time, whispering, "If there's a secret, it's down there." The thought clung to her all night. In her investigation notes, Jennings wrote, "Keene lived alone, nocturnal activity in basement, evidence of dirt under nails, energy consumption spike. Hypothesis, possible concealment of remains on property." The next morning, she sent a summary to command. Its conclusion was a single sentence: recommend forensic examination of former residents at 74 Alder Street. As she signed, Jennings felt a chill run down her spine. She knew she was about to enter a place where 50 years ago, basement lights burned through the night, and perhaps never truly went out. 3 weeks after submitting the request, a search warrant was approved by Multnomah County Court. Lieutenant Claire Jennings held the document, reading the slanted print, "Forensic search authorized, 74 Alder Street." It was a rare procedure for a case closed over half a century ago, with the prime suspect deceased, but the new DNA evidence changed everything. Now, they could return to Arthur Keene's old house, where Jennings believed the heart of the hidden truth lay. The house sat in a quiet West Portland neighborhood, old homes mixed with newer ones. The current owners, a middle-aged couple named Carver, had bought it in 2008. They were cooperative, though slightly surprised when Jennings presented the warrant. "We've heard about him, about that disappearance," Mrs. Carver said, clutching a kitchen towel. "But this house is fine. We've never seen anything odd." Jennings nodded, explaining the search would focus on the basement and backyard. The homeowner led them down a wooden staircase, where yellow light illuminated old cement walls. The air was cold and dry, smelling of old paint and mold. When the forensic team arrived, they began moving the Carvers' stored items out. The concrete floor was thick, with old patches and areas of mismatched cement. Jennings checked the city's building records, comparing the 1968 original blueprint to the current structure. On paper, the basement was 18 square meters, but a new laser scan showed it was nearly a meter larger on the east side, likely expanded. "This wall isn't in the original plans," she said, pointing to a darker concrete section near the corner. "It was added later." A forensic tech nodded, setting up a ground-penetrating radar GPR machine to scan beneath the surface with microwaves. The basement fell silent, except for the machine's low hum. On the screen, bright wave patterns appeared, sweeping across the concrete, reflecting solid, hollow, or foreign objects below. In the center, signals were steady, indicating a solid slab. But at the darker wall, Jennings had noted, the waves distorted abruptly. A rectangular dark patch appeared, about half a meter deep. The tech zoomed in, adjusting sensitivity. The patch had clear edges, surrounded by different colored cement. He looked at Jennings, saying softly, "There's a void under the added layer." Jennings ordered 2 more scans from different angles. The results matched. Each time, the dark patch appeared in the same spot near the east wall. "Could be a utility nook or old water tank," a tech suggested. Jennings didn't buy it. She stepped closer, shining a flashlight along the floor. The cement seam was faintly visible, slightly raised, a trace of later pouring. "I want it verified now," she said. "Prepare a test drill." They drilled a small hole with a steel bit, just a few millimeters wide. The machine whined steadily, cement dust rising lightly. When the bit pierced the first layer, the sound shifted from solid friction to a hollow echo. The tech stopped, looking at Jennings. "There's a cavity below, about 40-50 centimeters deep." The basement air grew heavy. Jennings signaled a pause, contacting command to request expanded excavation. Minutes later, the reply came, "Authorized. Proceed per crime scene protocol." Every action was recorded from then on. A small wooden frame was set around the area to contain dust, and halogen lights illuminated the wall. They began cutting the concrete in small slabs, numbering and logging each piece. The smell of dust and burnt metal filled the air. After 30 minutes, the final thin cement layer was removed, revealing dark soil beneath. Everyone stepped back, making way for the forensic tech. He crouched, scraping soil with a small trowel. At about half a meter, the soil darkened to gray-brown, damper than above. A tech whispered. This ground was dug up and refilled. Jennings' heart pounded. She knelt, observing her breath mingling with fine dust. Under the light, a lighter streak appeared in the soil, about half a meter long, like the edge of something harder than the surrounding dirt. The tech tapped it with the trowel. Hearing a hollow clack, he stopped, looking up. There's a structure below, not natural rock. Jennings signaled a halt. Seal the area. Pause until the major forensics team arrives. Before leaving the basement, she glanced back at the corner. Everything was still, just the carved-out concrete square, damp dark soil, and the deep void the radar had revealed. She stood there a long time, a chill spreading down her spine, not just from the damp but from instinct. They had reached the place where, for over half a century, the case's secret had lain silent. Outside, Portland's late afternoon light filtered dimly through the trees. Jennings wrote her final field note. Initial GPR scan indicates void beneath reinforced section. Possible concealment cavity. Excavation to commence. She paused, adding 2 smaller words in the margin. No mistake. That evening, as the forensic team left, the house returned to quiet. In the basement, a forgotten light still shone on the empty wall, casting Jennings' shadow on the cement. She said nothing more, just stared at the damp soil until the light flickered, signaling a low battery. Amid the faint hum of the scanning equipment, Claire Jennings knew that, for the first time in over 50 years, Evelyn Hartley's disappearance was no longer just a story in a file. It was becoming real, right beneath this cold concrete. The next morning, Alder Street was temporarily cordoned off. 2 forensic vans parked at the gate, yellow tape wrapped around the wooden fence. Curious neighbors watched from a distance, peeking through windows. Inside, the basement of 74 Alder was lit by high-powered lamps. The specialized forensic team from the Oregon State Forensic Division arrived, bringing cameras, excavation tools, and a mobile storage unit. Lieutenant Claire Jennings signed the scene handover at 8:47 a.m. In the form's blank space, she added 4 words, possible human remains. The basement was silent, except for the scratch of her pen and the hum of a generator outside. Excavation began. 2 techs in white hazmat suits and masks stood at the corner where the radar had detected the void. The first drill bit hit the concrete, emitting a sharp, piercing sound that echoed through the basement. Jennings stood back, holding a clipboard, eyes tracking the equipment's readings. After nearly 20 minutes, the first concrete layer was removed. Beneath the white dust was dark, compacted soil with a musty, damp smell. Techs scraped away layers with small trowels, placing soil in metal trays by stratigraphic order. Each layer was measured, photographed, and labeled. No one spoke, only the clink of metal on dirt and the click of cameras. At about 60 centimeters, the soil shifted from gray to dark brown-black. A tech crouched, tapping something harder with the trowel. A dry, sharp sound rang out. He signaled. Jennings stepped forward, kneeling. A faint gray fabric emerged, mixed with dirt, frayed, but still showing woven threads. The tech switched to a finer tool, brushing away tiny soil grains. A cylindrical structure appeared, a thin, slightly curved bone, like a child's forearm. The team fell silent. Jennings took a deep breath, nodding slightly. "Record it. Start collection protocol," she said, voice hoarse but clear. The camera switched on. Every move was slow and precise. A stainless steel table was set up nearby for samples. The tech cleared soil around the bone, using a soft brush. As more soil was removed, additional small fragments appeared, matching human skeletal structure. No doubt remained. They stood before a makeshift grave. At the bottom, the gray fabric was a synthetic blanket, common in the late 1960s. It wrapped the small skeleton, bound with old rope that crumbled at a touch. The tech cut the rope, unfolding the blanket. Under the light, the skeleton was clear, intact from skull to hips, with fragmented legs and hands, eroded by time. A small skull fragment, cracked at the left temple, bore a visible fracture line. Jennings clenched her fists, breathing deeply. "Mark the injury site," she said, stepping back for the forensic team. As they recorded, another tech spotted a glinting object in the soil by the body's right side. Using tweezers, he brushed off dirt and whispered, "Silver necklace." The team turned. The circular pendant bore 2 engraved letters, EH, faint but legible. Jennings took it, stared long, then placed it in a separate evidence bag, labeled Personal Effect #1, engraved pendant. Nearby, in the crumbled soil, another item appeared, an old cloth doll, decayed but with a roughly sewn head and a small lace piece, likely something Evelyn carried. As it was placed on the steel table beside the necklace, the basement fell utterly silent. Jennings called a 5-minute pause to photograph the scene before collecting samples. She stood, looking around, her shadow cast on the damp soil by the lights. In the white glow, the small skeleton lay still, the tattered blanket wrapped around it like a silent marker of the past. She knew this was the moment Lieutenant Harold Dunn had once hoped for, but never lived to see. Collection continued into the afternoon. Each bone was numbered, placed in separate bags, with positions noted on a diagram. Surrounding soil was sampled for dating analysis. When the final bone was lifted, Jennings turned to the lead examiner, her voice low but firm. "Seal the area. No one in or out until 3D imaging is complete." A 360-degree camera system was set up, scanning every detail for a digital record of the scene. Outside, rain began to fall. Drops pattered on the forensic van's roofs, blending with the steady hum of cameras. Inside the basement, the lights burned white. As the small skeleton was placed in a storage case, Jennings bowed her head, her lips moving silently with words only she could hear. 2 days later, a preliminary forensic report arrived from the Oregon State Laboratory. The opening line read, "Remains identified as human, juvenile female, age approximately 8-10. Under forensic DNA analysis, the results showed a 100% match with DNA from Nora Hartley, Evelyn's mother, stored in the National Missing Persons Database from 2001. The final conclusion confirmed remains of Evelyn Hartley, reported missing January 1971. Jennings read it, sat in silence for a long time, then placed the paper on the desk. That afternoon, she returned to the basement to oversee the final sealing. The stripped concrete left a neat square pit, surrounded by red and yellow marker stakes. Overhead, a hanging bulb cast a faint glow. Jennings stood in the basement, looking at the empty space one last time. She knew legal procedures, reports, and announcements would drag on, but for her, this moment closed a half-century circle. She spoke slowly, as if to the room itself. "The girl never left this street." The cameraman paused, lowering his device. A young tech nearby bowed his head, silent. Jennings looked up at the ceiling, where rainwater dripped from a crack, blending into the old dirt dust. Outside, Portland's rain fell as always, but this time it sounded different. Lighter, as if after all these years, the city finally exhaled, releasing a child forgotten too long. That evening, in her report to headquarters, Jennings wrote the final line, "Excavation completed. Human remains positively identified as Evelyn Hartley. Items recovered, 1 silver pendant, 1 cloth doll fragment. Location of recovery, beneath additional concrete layer, east wall of basement." She signed, folded the file, and stood to look out the window. The city's lights reflected on the glass, mingling with the darkness. Somewhere out there, Portland's memory had been unearthed with a meter of soil, and the secrets it held for 51 years finally had shape, name, and an answer. 3 days after the DNA results were released, Evelyn Hartley's case was officially classified as homicide, cold case solved. But for Lieutenant Claire Jennings, finding the remains was only the beginning. The biggest question now was who helped Arthur Keene conceal the crime. A middle-aged man, living alone, without heavy equipment, couldn't have poured a half-meter-thick concrete layer in the basement without neighbors noticing. Jennings revisited 1971 construction material purchase records in Keene's file from Oregon Hardware Supply, a now-defunct Portland store. The handwritten invoice, ink faded, still read, 4 bags of Portland cement, 2 bags gravel mix. Purchaser, Arthur L. Keene. Assisted by Samuel Keene. Samuel's name appeared for the first time in the case file. Jennings immediately checked civil records. Samuel Keene, born 1947, Arthur's younger brother, resided in Salem, Oregon, about 50 miles south of Portland. Occupation, retired carpenter, formerly with a local construction company. A marginal note, no criminal record. Tax records showed he lived alone, his wife deceased since 2011. Reading this, Jennings pictured a chain of events, a brother skilled in construction, living near Portland, buying cement with Arthur at the time of Evelyn's disappearance. The next morning, she drove to Salem. Oregon's sky was overcast as usual, light drizzle falling, forests along the road, veiled in white mist. Samuel's house sat in an old suburb, its wooden roof and front yard covered in dry leaves. When Jennings knocked, it took nearly a minute for the latch to click. A gray-haired thin man in a gray sweater answered. Jennings introduced herself, showing her badge, Portland Police Bureau, Cold Case Division. "I need to speak with you about your late brother, Arthur Keene." Samuel froze briefly, then invited her in. The small living room was dimly lit, filled with handmade wooden furniture. Old photos lined the walls, mostly of the brothers when young. One caught Jennings' eye, taken in 1970. Arthur and Samuel stood by a small truck, its bed loaded with cement bags. She asked, "Do you remember when that was?" Samuel glanced briefly, then replied softly, "A long time ago, we were fixing Arthur's house foundation." Jennings set a recorder on the table. "Mr. Keene, I need specifics. A 1971 invoice lists you as helping transport cement to 74 Alder Street, Portland. Is that correct?" He was silent, fingers tapping lightly on the chair's arm. "Yes," he said after a pause. "I helped with a few cement bags." He said he wanted to patch the basement walls, some damp spots. Jennings asked, "Did you go into the basement?" He replied, "Yes, I helped clear some dirt bags. The place smelled odd, like rusted iron. I asked, and Arthur said it was a dead rat." His voice faded. Jennings looked directly at him, voice calm. "Mr. Keene, we excavated under that concrete. We found a girl's body, Evelyn Hartley, missing since 1971. Samuel froze, his face paled, eyes glazing behind glasses. He didn't respond, staring at the floor. The room stayed silent so long, only the wall clock's ticking was audible. Finally, he spoke, barely a whisper. "I didn't think they'd find it." Jennings held his gaze, saying nothing. He continued, "I knew something was wrong, but my brother," he looked at me with eyes I'd never seen, "told me to just help pour the foundation and forget it. I was scared. I stayed silent my whole life." Jennings opened her notebook, jotting each word. "Mr. Keene, did you know what happened before he asked you to pour the foundation?" Samuel shook his head. "No, I just remember that evening, Arthur called me near 10, said he needed help the next morning. When I got there, I saw a corner of the basement dug up, covered with a cloth. He said it was a water leak. I didn't look under it, I just mixed cement. He poured the final layer himself. Afterward, he never mentioned it again." His voice trembled. "I didn't know what was underneath. But his eyes that day told me not to ask." Jennings closed her notebook, her tone stern but not harsh. "Mr. Keene, knowing and not reporting is a serious matter. But your cooperation now can help establish the full truth." Samuel nodded slowly. "I'm ready. Just one request. Don't put my picture in the papers. I couldn't bear people looking at me like they did him." Jennings agreed. She collected the recording, took his fingerprints, and left the house in silence. On the drive back to Portland, Jennings replayed the recording. Samuel's frail, trembling voice echoed in the car. "I didn't think they'd find it." The words repeated, like an echo from the past. In her interim report, She wrote Samuel Keene. Material witness assisted Arthur Keene in pouring basement concrete. Admission indicates awareness of concealment, though claims no direct knowledge of homicide. As the car turned onto the highway, rain fell again. Drops clung to the windshield, blurring distant lights. Jennings gripped the steering wheel, eyes forward. She knew this confession wasn't the end, just a door cracking open to a deeper truth. The Keene brothers buried with that concrete in 1971. 2 days after the Salem meeting, Lieutenant Claire Jennings received a call from the Marion County Sheriff's Office. Samuel Keene had voluntarily come forward, requesting to tell everything. When Jennings arrived, he sat in a small interrogation room, hands clasped, looking exhausted. A public defender beside him nodded silently. Jennings set the recorder on the table, turned on the light, and confirmed the time and attendees. "Mr. Keene, you said you want to add to your statement. Are you ready to begin?" Samuel nodded, his voice dry and gravelly. "I'm tired, keeping silent for 50 years. It's not easy. I can't carry it anymore." He looked directly at Jennings, speaking slowly. "That morning Arthur called me. I remember clearly, January 71, raining, wet ground. He said he needed me urgently, an accident during a music lesson. I asked which student. He only said the neighbor girl. I didn't understand. But his voice was different, panicked, broken. When I got there, the house door was open. The piano light still on. On the floor was a gray blanket, rolled up. I saw a small hand sticking out, pale. I froze." Jennings didn't interrupt, only noted. Samuel continued. "Arthur said it was an accident. He was teaching her piano. She fell, hit her head on the table edge. But I knew it wasn't an accident. There was blood on the stairs, a broken chair. I asked why he didn't call the police. He grabbed my shoulders, said, 'If they come, they'll think I hurt her. You understand, Sam, you have to help me.' His voice shook, almost crying. I didn't know what to do. I was stupid, scared." Samuel paused, taking a long breath. "Arthur told me to get cement from the warehouse. I did. When I returned, he dug a hole in the basement. The girl was wrapped in the blanket. I couldn't look long. He told me to mix cement. He placed the bundle down. He whispered, 'We'll pour the foundation again. No one will know.' I said nothing. I followed. I just wanted it all to disappear." When the concrete covered it, Arthur stared for a long time, then said, "Promise you'll never mention this." The room was silent, only the ceiling fan's slow hum audible. Jennings asked softly, "Did you know the real reason why she died?" Samuel shook his head, tears falling on his hand. "I don't know, but I remember Arthur saying weeks earlier, she unsettled him, that he shouldn't teach privately anymore. I think, maybe he did something that scared her, and she tried to run. Maybe he stopped her, and things got out of control." His voice broke, trembling. I asked him once, was it on purpose? He just said, "It's done." Jennings let a few seconds pass before asking, "What happened after?" Samuel said, "He cleaned everything, washed the blanket, burned stuff in the furnace. I helped carry some things to the truck, then left. I didn't go back to his house for years. He moved, lived reclusively, barely contacted anyone. I think he lived with his guilt. I lived with my cowardice." He bowed his head, his voice barely a breath. "I heard he died in 2003. I thought it was over. But when you came, I knew God wouldn't let me escape." Jennings turned off the pen, looking at him long. "Mr. Keene, are you ready to sign this statement?" Samuel nodded. She read the full account aloud. Every detail, time, place, assisting with the concrete, Arthur's words. At the part about an accident during a music lesson, Samuel closed his eyes, whispering, those were the last words he said before ruining everything. Then he signed. Jennings verified the signature, stamped the time, and filed the original under case #71047. Supplementary statement. The recorder kept running, capturing the heavy air in the room, where after over half a century, the truth was finally spoken, not through evidence, but through remorse. That afternoon, the case file was sent directly to the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office. Prosecutor Lydia Markham reviewed the full statement, then signed sufficient grounds for posthumous confirmation of homicide. Recommend charge, accessory after the fact, concealment of homicide. Under Oregon law, concealing a murder, even if the statute of limitations for homicide had expired, could be prosecuted separately. Markham looked at Jennings and said, "We can't bring Arthur Keene to court, but we can name his crime, publicly, legally." That evening, Jennings left the office as the rain cleared. Portland's cold wind blew through wet trees. In her car, she replayed the final part of the interrogation. Samuel's trembling, aged voice filled the quiet. "I didn't think they'd find it, but maybe it needed to be found, so we wouldn't carry the guilt to our graves." Jennings closed her eyes briefly. She knew the case was entering a new chapter, no longer about who did it, but why the silence lasted so long. In the file, below Samuel Keene's signature, Jennings added a small, neat handwritten note, "Confession obtained." Truth finally spoken aloud, 51 years late. On the morning of June 14, 2023, Salem City Police executed an arrest warrant for Samuel Keene, 78, on charges of concealment and obstruction of a homicide investigation related to Evelyn Hartley's 1971 disappearance. Lieutenant Claire Jennings was present as the Marion County team led the elderly man from his small wooden house. There was no resistance. Samuel, in an old gray sweater and worn slippers, had cloudy eyes that scanned around as if he'd known this day would come. As Jennings approached, he said softly, his voice hoarse and breathless, "I've been waiting for this day." Jennings responded, "You have the right to remain silent and to have an attorney present. Anything you say can be used as evidence in court." Samuel nodded, giving a faint, bitter smile. "I've said everything, now it's time to make up for what's missing." His words silenced Jennings. She only signaled for the officers to escort him. The patrol car left the neighborhood as weak morning sunlight filtered through pines, reflecting on the windshield. In the back, the old man sat upright, hands on his knees, eyes fixed out the window where Portland faded into the fog. That afternoon, the Portland Police Department held an official press conference. The third-floor hall was packed with reporters from across the state. At the podium, Jennings stood beside Oregon State Prosecutor Lydia Markham and Police Chief Ethan Caldwell. Behind them, a screen displayed an old photo of Evelyn Hartley, a 9-year-old smiling by a piano, taken in 1970. As camera shutters quieted, Markham stepped to the microphone, her voice firm. After 52 years, the disappearance of Evelyn Hartley, known as the Maple Street Mystery, has been officially resolved. We confirm that Arthur L. Keene, a former Portland music teacher, was responsible for her death. Thanks to advancements in DNA technology, evidence collected in 1971 led to the discovery of her remains and identification of the victim. His brother, Samuel Keene, is now charged with concealing the crime. Jennings spoke next. She scanned the room as camera flashes flickered. "This isn't just a case solved," she said, "but justice restored, however late. A hair preserved for half a century became a voice for a child. Today, that voice is heard." Her tone was steady, but her eyes revealed the exhaustion and determination of over a year of reinvestigation. Reporters raised hands with questions. Was Samuel Keene directly involved in the killing? Did he cooperate with the investigation? Jennings answered briefly. Based on statements and evidence, there's no indication Samuel Keene participated in the homicide. However, he actively aided in concealing the body and remained silent for 51 years, constituting accessory after the fact of homicide under Oregon law. Prosecutor Markham added, "Though the main suspect is deceased, the law doesn't end its duty to the truth. Any act obstructing justice, whether in 1971 or 2023, must face accountability." She confirmed the formal indictment had been filed with Multnomah County Court, with a preliminary hearing set for June 21. After the press conference, Oregon media erupted. The Oregonian's front page blared, "Missing girl case from 1971 solved. Teacher's brother arrested in shocking turn." TV news replayed Jennings standing in the basement where the remains were found. Cold light illuminating concrete walls. They called her the one who woke the past. That evening, Jennings returned to the Cold Case Division office. On her desk, the Hartley file sat in a new folder, nearly twice as thick as before: excavation reports, DNA results, Samuel's confession, and Markham's indictment. She flipped to the first page, reading the slanted text: Case #71047, status, solved, prosecution pending. Below was Evelyn's small photo, bright eyes, simple smile. Jennings closed the file softly, whispering, "Justice forgets no one, it just arrives late." In Salem's detention center, Samuel Keene was moved to a separate cell due to his frail health. When his lawyer asked if he wanted to appeal, he shook his head. "I hid for a lifetime. No more hiding." At 78, he was the last living witness to a case that once haunted Portland. That week, the city settled into a quiet mood. Newspapers, social media, and TV shows revisited Evelyn Hartley, the girl who vanished from Maple Street on a foggy morning in 1971. Now, after half a century, the case had an answer. And Portland, somehow, seemed to breathe deeply after 52 years of waiting. 3 weeks after the press conference, the Oregon State Forensic Division completed its final report on the Evelyn Hartley case. The nearly 200-page document bore a clear cover title: Forensic Consolidated Report, Case #71047. Lieutenant Claire Jennings received the original during a Monday morning handover in the quiet Cold Case Division office. Opening the first page, the administrative summary read, "Analysis completed. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to skull. Physical evidence consistent with concealment using Portland cement batch 1971." The first section detailed the injury: the left skull fractured in a radiating pattern, with a concave dent from a flat-edged hard object. The report concluded the wound matched a strong impact, possibly from a flat wooden or metal object, at close range, not an ordinary accident. Under environmental trace, examiners noted microparticles of paint and lacquer consistent with piano frame coating. It matched the brand of piano Keene owned, noted in the 1971 interrogation records. Jennings paused at that line, eyes narrowing. Accident during a music lesson, the final lie Arthur Keene used to cover his crime. Now that piano became evidence against him, though he'd been dead 20 years. The next section analyzed materials from Keene's basement. Chemical tests showed the cement covering the remains contained calcium silicate and basalt additives unique to Portland Cement Co. S. January 1971 batch, matching the lot Arthur and Samuel Keene purchased per cent the old invoice. Experts compared it to other Portland structures from the same era, confirming the match was only possible if bought at that time and place. In other words, the concrete was 1971's material signature and Arthur Keene's. The third section, what Jennings awaited most, was DNA correlation. Samples from the inner synthetic blanket wrapping the remains yielded incomplete genetic traces, but enough to confirm Arthur Keene's DNA at 2 points: the right wrist fibers and the knotted edge. The lab stated, match probability 99.73%. Partial male DNA consistent with Arthur L. Keene. This was the final piece, sealing the chain Jennings' team pursued for over a year, from the hair in the backpack, to the cement, to the DNA on the blanket. The report's final pages laid out the evidence timeline. Original evidence 1971, schoolbag, unknown hair, tire tracks. Rediscovery 2022, DNA match to Arthur Keene. Excavation 2023, remains, necklace, doll, wrapped blanket. Material analysis, cement and sand matching 1971 batch. DNA analysis, Keene's traces on blanket, Evelyn's DNA on microscopic blood at blanket edge. Witness statement, Samuel Keene confirmed concealment. The forensic team's conclusion, in italics. All evidentiary materials support the conclusion that Evelyn Hartley died as a result of blunt force trauma inflicted within the residence of Arthur Keene, 74 Alder Street, Portland, Oregon, in January 1971. Subsequent concealment occurred immediately after death. With participation from Samuel Keene, Jennings closed the report, sitting silently. Outside, Portland's early summer rain fell lightly. She turned on the desk lamp, signing the internal document's final section, where command approval was needed to close the case. Recommendation: case status, solved. Below she handwrote 4 words for her predecessor, Harold Dunn. Justice confirmed, at last. That afternoon, she delivered the report to command. Chief Caldwell signed, stamping a red circle, closed, case hash, 71047. The stamp's soft thud on paper felt brief, but to Jennings, like a closing bell. Over half a century, from a cold rainy morning in 1971 to a raindrop in 2023, every piece finally formed a complete picture. Back in her office, she placed the file on the shelf, centered among solved cases. The spine read in black, Hartley, Evelyn. Window light hit the text, making it glow faintly like a breath. Jennings sat, stared long, then closed her eyes, letting Portland's rain blend with her heartbeat. After everything, a child was finally named among the found, and a city, after 52 years, could write 2 words the case never had: case solved. Samuel Keene's trial opened on the morning of October 9, 2023, at Multnomah County Courthouse in downtown Portland. Outside, the fall air was crisp, fog blanketing the Willamette River, and a line of people stretched nearly a block waiting to enter. Reporters, retired investigators, and residents from Maple Street's era gathered to witness the end of what was called Oregon's oldest solved case. Inside, white light bathed the wooden benches. Samuel Keene, 78, sat quietly at the defendant's table. Thin, white-haired, his face etched with deep wrinkles. His hands trembled slightly on his lap. Before him was his court-appointed attorney. In the front row, Lieutenant Claire Jennings sat with the cold case division team. At the prosecution table, Lydia Markham arranged a 2-inch thick file of evidence, statements, and forensic reports. Behind her, a large screen displayed State of Oregon versus Samuel Keene charge, accessory after the fact to homicide. Judge Douglas M. Pierce opened, his voice low and deliberate. This trial determines the responsibility of defendant Samuel Keene in concealing and obstructing the investigation of a 1971 homicide involving Evelyn Hartley's death. The jury is asked to hear all evidence and testimony and render a fair verdict. As he finished, papers rustled. The jury, 7 women, 5 men, had read hundreds of pages beforehand, but today they'd hear the story spoken. Prosecutor Markham stood, her voice clear and firm. Your Honor, 52 years ago, a 9-year-old vanished on Maple Street. A city searched. The case closed, but evidence never vanished. Through scientific advances, we identified Arthur Keene, the defendant's brother, as the perpetrator. Arthur is dead, but Samuel Keene, here, helped bury the body, poured concrete, and stayed silent for over half a century. Today, you'll hear him admit it in his own words. She approached the evidence stand, placing a recorder. This is Samuel Keene's confession, May 18, 2023. She pressed play. The aged, trembling voice filled the room. My brother said there was an accident during a music lesson. I saw a small hand sticking out of the blanket. I helped him mix cement, and we buried the girl in the basement. The sound lingered, silencing the courtroom. Some bowed their heads, others closed their eyes. Jennings sat upright, eyes fixed on the recorder, as if hearing it anew. Next, the prosecutor presented forensic evidence, skull photos, cement samples, the silver necklace, and DNA charts. Each appeared on the screen, pale blue light reflecting on faces. Markham said, Arthur Keene's DNA was on the blanket, wrapping the body. Evelyn's DNA was on its edge. The cement matches the 1971 batch the Keene brothers bought. This isn't coincidence. It's a crime built by their hands. The defense attorney countered, arguing his client acted under mental coercion and fear, claiming he wasn't certain it was a body. Markham responded, if it was fear, it lasted 52 years, long enough for a child to be forgotten. The law doesn't punish weakness, but doesn't forgive silence when justice is buried. During testimony, Samuel walked slowly to the stand. He chose to speak, not relying on his lawyer. His voice was hoarse, soft but steady. I'm not here to defend myself. I knew my brother did wrong, but I didn't dare speak. Every time I passed his house, I heard piano music, and it trapped me. That sound reminded me she was still down there. I was wrong. I deserve punishment. A long silence followed. Jennings looked at him, no longer seeing a conspirator, but a man who'd imprisoned himself in guilt for a lifetime. Judge Pierce asked, Mr. Keene, do you understand that this admission aligns with the prosecution's charge? Samuel nodded. I understand, and I accept it. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated under 4 hours. On the afternoon of October 12th, they returned, the foreperson reading the verdict. On the charge of accessory after the fact to homicide, we find the defendant Samuel Keene guilty. The air was heavy but calm. The judge delivered the sentence. Given the circumstances, age and cooperation, the court sentences you to 15 years imprisonment, with no parole for the first 10 years. You will serve at the Oregon State Correctional Facility, Salem Division. Samuel bowed his head slightly, saying softly, thank you. As the trial ended, Jennings stood feeling a long chapter close. Ahead, Prosecutor Markham shook her hand, voice low. 52 years, but justice came. Thank you. Jennings nodded, her gaze lifting to the courtroom ceiling, where afternoon light streamed through stained glass, casting faint orange-red hues. Outside, reporters crowded for interviews. Chief Caldwell declared, the 1971 disappearance, case #71047, the Maple Street mystery, is officially resolved. After 52 years of silence, we've heard the truth. A child has her name back in the records, and Portland can close this haunting chapter. Oregon, Washington, and national outlets ran the story. Evening news replayed Jennings leaving the courthouse, her coat damp with mist, hundreds of times. She said nothing, only looked north, toward Maple Street curving past Forest Park, where it all began. After half a century, the city heard the story's end. Justice may arrive late, but it finds its way. The Evelyn Hartley case, Portland, 1971, is not just a tragedy closed after 52 years, but a mirror reflecting how Americans today view justice, memory, and community responsibility. In a modern society where news shifts hourly, this story reminds us that some things should not and cannot be forgotten. A hair preserved for half a century in an evidence vault through modern DNA technology and Lieutenant Claire Jennings' persistence became the key to unlocking the past. The lesson is clear. Justice may come late, but only if people keep searching. In today's United States, where technology advances rapidly, the Hartley case underscores the importance of preserving data, trusting science, and upholding professional ethics, elements that turned a cold case into a symbol of resilience. From Samuel Keene's belated confession, we see the weight of silence. 52 years of avoidance didn't lighten guilt, only forced him to live half a life haunted. In a society valuing individualism like America, it reminds us that silence in the face of wrong is a form of complicity. Conversely, Jennings' pursuit, doggedly chasing truth despite a closed file, embodies responsible citizenship, the belief that one person can make a difference, even by not overlooking a small detail. The Hartley case is a reminder for Americans today, in a chaotic world, truth is worth pursuing. Memory deserves respect, and justice, even delayed, holds redemptive value for a community. If you believe justice can come late, but never fades, please subscribe to our channel to join us in exploring more cases forgotten by time. Thank you for following Evelyn Hartley's story. See you in the next video, where truth is awakened once more.